Hi, hello everyone. So this is the first part of Mammalian Dentition. So we will be dealing with basic terminologies as well as, of course, the first two of the four types of basic heterodont teeth, which would be your incisors and canines. So let's get started. Oops, sorry. So first is why exactly are mammalian teeth so diverse? Well, it's part of the success of mammals is partly because of their dentition. It allowed them to more or less take advantage of a wider array of diets, and so that's essentially why their teeth have to be just as diverse. You can't expect to deal with a certain food item with a wrong or improper set of tools. And also, the life history of mammals has a lot to do with why they need to have a good set of teeth. The thing with mammals is that they are, of course, endothermic and homeothermic. With that being said, they need to regulate their own body temperature and generate their own heat. Of course, to do that in a very quick manner, somehow the food that you get, has to get to your body in a more or less processed way, and so that's why digestion starts at the mouth. If you have your food at very fine pieces, it'll be digested faster in your body, and so you're able to produce heat a lot faster. Okay? Yeah. So let's go for basic tooth anatomy. So first, let's deal with, for example, if this part is your gum line, so the part that is above the gum line is called the crown, and the one that is below the gum line, the one that you don't see, is the root. As for the layers, the outermost layer is called the enamel. It's also the hardest layer. Okay, the one underneath it, it's also a very tough layer, but it is a lot softer than enamel because it contains more organic material. It's called the dentine. Okay, and finally, the innermost layer that contains the nerves and the blood vessels, it's called the pulp cavity. And this area of your pulp cavity is called the root canal. Okay, and for the root part, the outermost structure that protects the dentine is called the cementum. It also functions in binding the root to the alveolus or the sockets. Okay, so it's like the glue, hence the word cement. Okay. Now, this is an example of how these layers are arranged in your herbivore tooth. So the toughest parts that need to grind the food are, well, of course, the ridges, and so those are the ones that are made of enamel. Okay. Now let's go for some basic terms. So first is that your growth or the growth of your tooth can be rooted or rootless. Okay. When the tooth is rooted, that means that the growth is limited, and so it is basically because of the constriction of your root canals. So that means the blood vessels are unable to get through, and so that's why eventually your tooth will stop growing. Okay, whereas there are also teeth that are rootless, in which the canals remain fairly wide, fairly wide, so a lot wider. So that's why the blood vessels are still able to stay there and more or less provide vascularization to promote the growth of your tooth. So an example we have would be for rodents. So this is an example of a squirrel with, well, their chompers haven't been gnawed, so their incisors are ever growing. So in this case, what will happen to this rodent? It will eventually die because it's unable to eat food with this kind of teeth. Okay. Now another thing we have to consider is called crown height, in which you can be a hypsodont, in which you have high crown teeth. So as you can see here, for example, the crown is relatively high. So this is your gum line, and so the crown is high. And brachiodont, where you have the crown is short. Okay, all right. So what is the significance of this? Essentially, of course, if you're dealing with tougher food, you need a higher crown because you need an abrasive surface that will last longer. Okay, whereas for brachiodont, so you usually have a softer diet. Okay, and next for the other features, of course, we have the cusps or the cones. So the cones essentially are the bumps that you find on the occlusal surface of your tooth. So the occlusal surface of your tooth is the surface or the surface that meets with the other tooth. Okay, so it's this part essentially. It is the surface that interacts the most with the food, and it bears the cusps or the cones or the bumps. Okay, and the alveolus would be, like I mentioned earlier, the sockets that you find on the jaws. Okay, there. All right. Now let's go for just a brief navigation, just so when we describe terms and the locations a little further, we're not going to be confused. So whenever you're in this side, which is the inside, in the palate, or in this side, near the tongue, so that means you're in the, so I'm going to put it there, LI for lingual. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, now whenever we are on this side of the tooth, near the lips, we are near, you call it the labial, okay, labial or buccal side. Okay, so again, this is the lingual, this is the labial side or the buccal side. This is the, of course, anterior side, and of course this is the more posterior side. I think for some this may also refer to the what we call the mesial side. Okay, there. So if you see the word mesial, so it's actually here, more anterior. Okay, so you're going to see in navigation that you have this kind of compass. So there. Okay, so there's a labial, lingual, posterior, and anterior. Now for replacement, so you could be either of the three. You're monophyodont if you have one set of teeth your entire life. You're a diphyodont if you have two sets of teeth. So the first would be your the deciduous or the milk teeth is what we call it commonly. And you also have the permanent dentition. And of course, you're a polyphyodont if you have an unlimited replacement set of teeth. As for the attachment, you can be an acrodont, in which, in this case, the teeth are set flat on the jaws. You can be an pleurodont, where the teeth are located more lingually, so they're a lot inner. There, so you can see here, they're set here and not here. Oops, sorry. Okay, and you can also be a thecodont. So I used an alligator, but of course an example would be mammals, in which the teeth are set in sockets, again, that we call alveoli. Okay. Now for the tooth row or the dental pattern, so you can be a homodont, in which the teeth appear very similarly, so the teeth along the tooth row, so the row of teeth, appear similarly. Or you can be a heterodont, in which you have the teeth along your tooth row all have, well, they appear differently, at least in sets. Each one doesn't have to be like completely different from the other, but there are sets of different kinds of teeth. Okay, and of course we are heterodonts, most of us. And those that aren't heterodonts, well, you have cetaceans. Okay, so whales, dolphins, so they have homodont dentition. Okay. Now let's deal with the first of the four. So four major types of heterodont teeth would be the first one would be the incisors, and they're right here. Okay, and these would be your descriptions. So unicuspid means one cusp, basically one cone. Okay, and mainly their function would be for nipping or cutting. You find this usually, if on the upper jaw, you will find this on the premaxilla bones. So in this case, this is the division right there. So the teeth here are the incisors. Okay, So some modifications, of course. So you have for shrews, the incisors are facing forward. Okay, forward facing incisors so that they can act as pincers that will capture the insects. Okay, so forgive my very sloppy drawing. Okay, there. So they act as pincers that are like chopsticks that get your insects. Okay, of course, for rodents and the lagomorphs, you have these kinds of incisors. Okay, I think that the term, if I'm not mistaken, is glyrimorph. So sorry about the handwriting. So glyrimorph incisors, in which they're very long, so they are rootless, they are ever growing, and they act as chisels. Okay, so that's why they have to constantly gnaw their food. Next would be for vampire bats, in which the incisors have a flat blade-like front, so with which they scrape the skin um, of their host before they actually drink the blood. Okay, there. The next set would be for canines, and usually you will find this only one per quadrant. So when we say quadrant, it's just basically one quadrant, one half. Okay, there are 1/4 actually, because if you consider the lower jaw, so 1, 2, 3, 4 for your lower jaw. Okay, so the first of the two quadrants here, okay, are shown here. And mainly for canines, they function to capture, secure, or kill prey, which is why for carnivores they're really very prominent, as in your wolves, and of course for your big cats. So the canines are found there. Now, of course, remember that there are what we call imposters, in which there are incisors that look like canines or that are caniniform, and there are also canines that look incisiform or incisoriform. Okay, so depending on your literature, you can also see incisoriform. Okay, so we have some pictures here. So incisors that look like canines, and canines that look like incisors. Okay, and of course, let's not forget tusks. Okay, so in this case, I would like you to find out these tusks. So, for example, for your deer, your walrus. So this is a boar tusk. Okay, of course, your elephant tusks and your walrus tusks. It's up to you to find out um, of the which of the two these are. Are they canines or are they incisors? So here I think you're gonna see they're pretty obvious. Okay, but for these two, maybe you got to do a little more research. And so that's my assignment for you guys. Okay. There. So just a disclaimer, I don't own any of the photos that I used in the screencast, and I would like to give credit to their respective owners, whoever they may be. So thank you so much. And so next we will be discussing the kinds of cheek teeth, so that will be the premolars and molars, and everything about them. It's going to be a pretty long discussion. So thank you very much.